If you've been watching my videos for 13, 14 years now, you've seen one of the main things I talk about is traditional diets, how they're much healthier than modern diets. They were developed empirically over thousands of years, whereas a modern diet, we're just guessing and eating things that are extremely unnatural, particularly white flour and refined sugar, not part of traditional diets, possibly behind a lot of the bad health that Americans in particular have today. The Weston Price Foundation is a great resource for studying traditional diets, and there are many, many other individuals who put a lot of effort into discussing traditional diets and why they're healthy and what is missing in the modern diet that was available in traditional diets. So I would really recommend, if you haven't seen my past videos or other videos on the topic, check out the Weston Price Foundation first of all. But amongst all of these discussions, there are a few items which aren't really mentioned much. And so I'm making this video mostly to go over these items which were in traditional diets and which the latest research shows are important, but nobody seems to be discussing how they're missing in the modern diet. The first one of these items is spices. You'll never really hear many of the alternative health people online talking about the importance of spices. Traditional urban diets had a lot of spices generally, and we don't have so much of that in the American diet ever, or the modern American diet. Spices are extremely high in antioxidants. They're kind of a way, if you don't have access to vegetables, as urban people didn't always in the past, or people that lived in desert environments, you could add spices and kind of mimic a lot of the benefits that you would get from vegetables, a lot of the phytochemicals that are in vegetables. Most people think of spices as just something to add flavor to food, but instead they're a very concentrated form of antioxidants, much higher levels of antioxidants than you'll get in vegetables, and it appears that a lack of antioxidants is behind most of the epidemic diseases that we see in our society today. Heart disease, cancer, Alzheimer's, all decreased to a large degree when you have a diet high in antioxidants, which is almost impossible unless you eat a lot of vegetables or a fair amount of spices in your food. So I just wanted to put that out there, that spices are something that was very common in traditional diets and lacking in the modern diet, and you don't really hear much discussion about this. It's something worth investigating. It's not just that spices make food taste better. The reason that they make food taste better is that they're adding antioxidants to your food the same way that vegetables are. The next topic is kind of hard to reestablish in the modern diet, and this is natural medicines that were traditionally eaten as teas or digestive drinks, and we don't really have them anymore. Instead, we have pharmaceuticals that are based on these natural medicines. The theory behind these herbs is that our bodies evolved with them. They're natural toxins, but a healthy cell in your body can handle a small amount of this toxin. A lot of modern chemotherapy, nearly all malarial drugs, antibacterial drugs, often based on a modified patentable version of these natural toxins that we used to drink as teas or as digestive drinks. Examples are bitter almond, the basis of amaretto, the substance in green walnuts, the basis of nicino, gentian root, the main substance in gin, wormwood, main substance in absinthe. When we had these as part of our diet, we were able to perhaps fight off bacteria or worms or cancer cells at a low level, whereas today when we don't have them, we often have these problems perhaps get out of hand, and then we need to take high levels of a pharmaceutical that we aren't really able to handle as well. It's a difficult topic because how do you reestablish this in your diet without drinking a digestive drink that perhaps doesn't even have the original version of the herb anymore? But by following your intuition, perhaps it's a topic worth studying and reestablishing some knowledge of it, rather than just taking high levels of pharmaceuticals once a problem gets out of hand. The next issue, which I feel doesn't get nearly enough attention, is soluble fiber in the diet. I've gone over this in at least one or two videos in the past. You constantly hear in the alternative health community now, probiotics, eating healthy bacteria. But that's really only a small part of solving this issue. If you have probiotics, but you don't actually feed the healthy bacteria in your gut, then it doesn't seem to do a lot of good. And soluble fiber is an important part of the food of a natural, healthy intestinal flora, whereas today we don't get much soluble fiber in the modern American diet. Where if you eat natural whole foods, you'll get a lot more soluble fiber, and then this will feed the healthy bacteria in your intestines. In particular, these bacteria form short-chain fatty acids that we don't get much of in the modern diet, and there have been numerous epidemiological studies that showed the importance of soluble fiber. Yet it's not really stressed a lot. I feel that it's a foundational issue for health to have healthy intestinal flora. There are more bacteria in your intestines than there are cells in your body, and they work symbiotically with you in many ways that we probably don't understand. In fact, for many years, scientists and doctors had no idea why soluble fiber had such a beneficial effect in heart disease, for example, and lowering cholesterol. And now we're just starting to understand that probably it's because soluble fiber is the basis of a healthy intestinal flora, and that's the basis of many parts of a healthy diet. So rather than just focusing on probiotics and eating yogurt and getting healthy bacteria, focus on what you're feeding the bacteria to keep them healthy. And a main part of that is eating whole foods that are high in fiber, particularly soluble fiber. The next substance missing in our modern diet, which is not really discussed by the alternative health community, is collagen. Now, your body can form collagen from other amino acids, and this is kind of where the discussion ends for most of the alternative health community, if they discuss collagen at all. But when you look at traditional diets, particularly among workers, you'll see a lot of collagen-rich material, food that you don't really see anywhere in the modern American diet. It's a controversial topic because vegetarians are very against it, and also just about everybody else is grossed out by a dish that has soup bones or tendons or fish head soup or skin or intestines of an animal in it. I don't know whether it's good to promote this because it's probably not the most ethical food. However, things like soup bones I do feel are generally just wasted anyway, and the real issue with our food supply is factory farming, and once that's been solved, then working on reducing meat in the diet in general. And if you can get the most benefit from meat by eating things like collagen that you won't get enough of through normal animal products, then maybe you can reduce the amount of meat that you eat otherwise. At least this is my rationalization. I do see a lot of people in America that can't even perform minor labor, and they have tendon issues or joint issues, whereas people in other countries who are eating much higher collagen levels in their diet are able to perform hard labor all day long. And perhaps part of the reason is their diet, and the American diet being extremely lacking in collagen. The next issue I've gone over many times in the past, but I can't stress it enough because nobody else really talks about this, even though it's a foundation of traditional wisdom and even your intuitive knowledge. And this is toxins in food that is not fresh, and toxins that are bioaccumulated in scavenger animals. You intuitively know not to eat a vulture, not to eat a rat. Traditionally, there was a lot of wisdom that you shouldn't eat animals that eat garbage, like pigs or fish without scales. These animals bioaccumulate toxins from rotten meat. And modern science doesn't really understand this. Modern science can't tell you why you shouldn't eat a piece of roadkill as long as you boil it enough to kill the bacteria in it. But the reason is that as meat rots, bacteria in the meat produce toxins to stop hire animals from eating that meat so that the bacteria can digest the meat before it's eaten by, for example, a mammal. And these toxins, the most effective type is a neurotoxin. So when you eat meat that is less than fresh, or you eat meat from a scavenger animal, you're bioaccumulating neurotoxins that diminish your mental capacity in ways that nobody really recognizes and are never really studied. Unfortunately, a lot of our meat supply now comes from animals that are effectively scavenger animals. Chickens and pigs especially, but even cattle are fed slaughterhouse byproducts as a major part of their diet. And even if they're fed vegetable sources of food, often that vegetable source was allowed to rot first. So it's accumulated biotoxins, and these animals, particularly chickens and pigs, are basically scavengers now. Traditionally, you wouldn't have been able to eat an animal that was fed garbage like this, but today we do. And when these neurotoxins bioaccumulate in your body, you'll see the few people that are kind of aware of this issue will say that it causes your mind to have sort of a looping effect. Deja vu is a symptom of this. Repeating songs in your head is a symptom of this. But it also just forms a closed-minded type of thought. You're not really open to an outside thought as much because your mind is constantly looping on itself and repeating things. Very few people discuss this, and even in the alternative health community, it's not really considered. But when you think about how you intuitively know not to eat an animal if it's a rat or a vulture, but you don't really recognize it when it's a cow, because traditionally cows ate grass. Today, cows eat rotten slaughterhouse byproducts or vegetable sources of food that was allowed to rot somewhat. And certainly that's the case with chickens and pigs. So to be more aware of that issue is really important, and to only eat animals that were raised naturally. When something is called grass-fed beef, it's still, unfortunately, allowed to be fed food other than grass for the last month or so of its life. And even when chickens have all vegetarian feed, that feed is perhaps often rotten and not from a good source. So it's kind of hard to source good quality fresh meat, but it's something that I think is vitally important if you're not a vegetarian. Lastly, I'll just throw in a couple more that you may have heard of, but they aren't discussed too much. One is vitamin K2. The Weston Price Foundation talks about this a lot. It's not necessarily a vitamin that you need to survive, but it was a natural part of our diet when you ate fermented products. Today, even things that they call fermented, like sauerkraut or cheese, often they just throw in a chemical to mimic the fermentation process. So it's really hard in America, especially, to get actually fermented food, and therefore you're not getting any K2 in your diet unless you eat organ meat from animals. And so K2 has been shown in the very few studies that have been done on it to dramatically lower cancer risk, to lower the risk of osteoporosis. Probably plays a lot of roles in the body, and as usual, it won't really be studied because there's not much money in it. It's something that's almost completely lacking in our diet, though, because we don't eat organ meat from animals, and we don't eat very much naturally fermented food. When you think you're eating a fermented food, you have to really look at that carefully and make sure that it's been fermented, rather than doing it the cheap way of throwing in a chemical and mimicking the fermentation process, as almost all mass-produced food in America is created. Lastly, just one more I wanted to mention real quick is sunlight. Scientists studied how sunlight is needed to form vitamin D, but there are likely countless other reactions that sunlight is involved with in the body. There have been epidemiological studies that show sunlight greatly enhances mood and other aspects of health. So today we're getting a lot less sunlight than we did naturally, something to keep in mind. Each of these topics is something that isn't really discussed much in even the alternative health community, yet traditionally we usually follow diets and practices that are very different from today. So rather than looking into some of the other issues that are repeated constantly in the alternative health community, like probiotics, these topics are ones that maybe are worth investigating and potentially make a big difference for people. Thanks for listening to the video. Sorry, these videos aren't great quality anymore. They're not really searchable, so I can't put in quite as much time. But I do think that this particular topic is especially important, and looking into these issues more is something that can make a big difference.